talk about what supplies you may want to buy and what may happen to the price of supplies during a disaster. Okay, so one of the words we really want to emphasize today from economics is the word scarcity. If you guys have ever played musical chairs, how many of you guys ever played musical chairs? It's a game about scarcity. There's just not enough stuff. So how do we determine, and each time one person doesn't get to and they get moved out of the game and we have scarcity. So what is economics? Well, basically economics is just how a society is going to manage these scarce resources. And what we know is how we manage them in econ is with prices. It's how we manage how few goods we're going to have, that if they're very scarce, they usually tend to have high prices. So today, during a disaster, we know goods are scarce because one of the things that happens is with storm surges and things like this, first of all, new supplies can't come in, right? And so if all of a sudden you're buying all of these things you normally don't buy, all of a sudden the shelves are empty. And how are we going to manage that? An example of this that I love to talk about with scarcity of a disaster is in the movie Titanic. How many of you guys saw Titanic? You did. Well, this is about when this boat that they thought was unsinkable. And so in the short run, when they were making this boat, they're like, this thing can't sink, and we want everyone to look on this beautiful boat to get to see everyone outside. And they made this decision to not have enough of the boat. You're not seeing it. Okay. Not have enough lifeboats for every passenger they had on board. And guess what? This unsinkable boat ends up sinking, right? And they only have what they call in econ a short amount of time to respond. And so what that does is it has two problems. One, there's no new ability for businesses or people to supply new boats. And there's no new ability for buyers to go anywhere else to buy the goods and services. What we talk about is inelasticity in economics. And so what you can see in this diagram I kind of showed you, this is basic supply and demand, is that the supply curve is perfectly vertical. There's no price that could have been paid on the Titanic to get more boats there that day, right? And everyone on the board would have given every penny they had to buy a seat on one of those lifeboats. But there was no equilibrium that would have existed. There was no way. There was just scarcity of lifeboats. And actually, because there was no price to maybe even allocate the resources, they did it through things like children and women first was how they allocated these scarce resources. But you found that they didn't even allocate those resources correctly. They had more seats, and they didn't even have enough people. They only saved 710 people, even though they had 1,100 seats that they could have put folks on. And so a lot of folks died that day because of it. Because we know that in econ, if they were given time, if the time frame wasn't so short, we could have had enough lifeboats. There are lifeboats on land. They were just not on the Titanic. If we could have shipped them in, we could have had more, and we would have been able to maybe save all of the folks. Okay, so what do we think about scarcity when we talk about disaster? This is a very normal picture in the middle of a disaster. What it is that typically businesses do not stock their shelves to be prepared for a disaster, because they're random. They don't happen all the time. And if I stocked my business like it was always going to be a disaster, I wouldn't have it stocked like people wanted it, right? Because most of the time you don't need a ton of water or extra, plywood or extra rice or sand or things. You just buy your normal consumption habits. And so businesses aren't designed for disasters. They're designed for every day when we're not experiencing a disaster. So in the short run, people go and get every supply they can, and all of a sudden the shelves are empty. So in normal behavior with supply and demand, we would think an increase in demand would only make prices go up just a little. Businesses would see that increase in demand, and they would actually figure out how to get more supplied to the area. But the problem is, in the short run, when a disaster happens, you usually have a few hours, maybe at best warning, sometimes not even that. So the businesses are not prepared for all of the supplies you're going to need. So there's scarcity in supply. And so what we find is when you see a perfectly vertical supply curve, that's what they're saying. They're just saying there is no more available right now. We only have what we have. We have what we stocked before based on normal demand. And just because you want more does not mean that there's more available. So what happens is to allocate those scarce resources, prices go up fast. So one of the things we know is inelastic demand. That means I have to have it. I'm trying to save my home. I'm trying to save my lab. It means I will pay more during those times if I have inelastic demand. Inelastic supply, same thing. It means there's not enough resources available. And so even if you're willing to pay me more, it's not like I can really give you that many more, right? It takes, those trucks have to come in and bring those. And that's called the long run. In the short run, I only have what I have. So inelastic demand, inelastic supply equals very high prices. So high, sometimes people have heard a term, you ever heard of a term called price gouging? They talk about that in times of disaster, that certain business owners are charging like outrageous prices, and how dare they? But economists will say, well, they're trying to manage this scarcity. They're trying so people maybe don't hoard resources because they're afraid. If this is like a long line for gas, if someone doesn't kind of manage the scarcity, one person may come up and try to buy as much of the gas as possible, right? Because they're afraid too. And what it means is that people later in the line won't have any at all. Right? Also, people are opportunistic. Sometimes people buy that gasoline and then they sell it for more, right? So even if someone did try to make it so the prices couldn't go up, there's 35 states in the United States that don't allow for price gouging, and you find sometimes in those states they have more scarcity at that time where people will have just made the shelves barren. So sometimes, you know, could gouging be good? Economists say maybe. It helps us manage the scarce resources. It makes it so you only buy what's necessary right now, because you know next week or in 2 weeks, prices are going to go back down. So you don't want to overstock. But if the prices stay the same, people may be like, oh, I'm just going to buy extra because who knows what's going to happen. And all of a sudden, some have a lot and others have none. And so they're going to say that the money, the high prices themselves are what's going to help allocate our resources. So you're going to find today you got money with your insurance money, but all of a sudden you're faced with these really high prices you may not have expected. So you have to make choices. And this is what this is going to be about. What are going to be your choices of what you're going to spend this money on to try to help protect you, because there's only scarce supplies. Okay, good luck, you guys.